All right, welcome to the Tech and Ed podcast, the only podcast that covers the geek side of EdTech. Welcome to the show, and thanks for joining. My name is Mohammed. Today I have my co-host with me, Tamer, and this is episode 2. And today we're going to be talking about disaster recovery and backup. So this week, a couple things that I had to work on are our new camera system. We've been reviewing a couple different vendors and companies, and I think we're finally reaching the end. And hopefully we get to pick the right vendor and be able to push it out throughout the whole district. And on Friday, I also met with the crew that is trying to create a COSIN chapter in New Jersey, so that way we can kind of have a united fleet of directors or coordinators, whatever it ends up being. And that was a pretty good conversation to see, the COSIN framework and kind of the education that comes along with it, and how they have their other states set up, other state chapters. How about you, Tamer? What were some of the things you worked on this week?
What did I do this week? Well, I spent a good amount of time on upgrading my domain controllers. So when I say that, 2019 came out, Server 2019's out, and one of the nice things is that you can have a hybrid and build a domain controller in Azure. So to do that, you need to have Server 2019 running. My domain controllers are actually really old, and it's just something I never got around to, actually going in and upgrading. So a lot of what I did was just upgrading my domain controllers. I had to upgrade my domain function level and then my forest function level to get us ready to migrate into 2019. And then one of the challenges I actually had was in older versions of Active Directory, the file replication of the sysvol folder, which holds all those group policies and logon scripts and all that stuff, was done by a protocol called FRS, which is no longer supported in Server 2019. So I had to go to DFSR, and so I had to, migrate my domain controllers. Microsoft actually has a really nice guide that they produced. So clearly, I'm not the only one in the world that ever had to do this.
Sure.
Yeah, but that was what took a lot of my week.
Yeah, that must have been pretty difficult. I can only imagine anytime you upgrade from 08 all the way to 2019 or many versions in between, it's generally not a smooth sailing thing. If you've constantly upgraded from year to year, it's pretty easy. But if you try to take any domain controller beyond 2 versions, I think 2 versions is like that magic number. Anything beyond 2 versions, you kind of have to do like a stepped upgrade where you upgrade, let's just say if you did have a domain controller running 08, you would push it to the next one, and then the one after that, and then the one after that. I forget exactly what years they were, and then until you got to 2019. So I'm pretty sure that was a bear to deal with.
Yeah, and like I said, I never really get to touch my domain controllers. Not that I don't want to upgrade them, but it's kind of one of those things that it works. And other than cleaning up group policy and the OUs and stuff over time, I never really looked too detailed into it. It's something I inherited when I started there. But yeah, function levels were at like 2003, and I'm trying to get all the way up to 2019 running. I think the primary domain controller was running 2008. So yeah, a lot of versions, but we're up to date now, which I'm happy about, and moving forward with that.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So this week I'm going to bring up a article on NJKick, and this is actually going to be, we're going to put it up on the screen in a second. Hold on. Okay. We're going to put it up on the screen in a second. Yeah, switch me, please.
You're good?
Yep.
I think this is you. Yep.
Excellent. And so this came out on February 21st, and it's basically an advisory that they put out for vulnerability that's out for Google Chrome. It basically explains that there is a severe issue with Chrome that can allow for arbitrary code execution. Now, what that means is, depending on your client level, your privilege level on that computer, if that code can run arbitrary code from the browser, it can start doing things on your machine, and if you're a privileged user, it can start installing programs, view, change, or delete data, which, as we all know, is a problem in schools. We need to make sure that anyone who is signed into a computer does not have the privileges to install or make any of these grand changes, and if they do, it's only under their profile. And that kind of goes into what we'll be talking about today, which is disaster recovery and backups, and whenever this does happen, to make sure that you have it backed up.
Yeah.
So this is the email that came from NJ Kick, and they go over, so the issues, the overview, home users, and some of the technical summary. But what I want to go over is the recommendations. And these are pretty straightforward recommendations, but I think we really need to set the standard moving forward. This is how any vulnerability should be treated. And they first start by saying, apply the stable update. That's so big. It's making sure not just Chrome, but all of your applications are updated. Many times I'll go into a district or, a family member or anything along the lines. And first thing I do is see if there are any updates, especially when they say they had a virus or there was an issue. I always update. There are so many security updates that come throughout the incremental updates with Microsoft, Google, Adobe, all of those. Just make sure it's always up to date. The second point is run all software as a non-privileged user. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, nobody can install software unless they have a specific domain account with additional privileges, and then our local admin account is very restricted, and we've been trying to find a way to disable it, but that becomes difficult when you're part of a domain. How do you handle that?
It's actually I actually like your idea of having domain accounts, and I think I stole it from you. You were mentioned to me a few weeks back. Even your tech people, their day-to-day accounts shouldn't be domain admin accounts, right?
That's right.
So that's something I think people don't realize. But yeah, we're just as susceptible to attacks, and we're all human, right? We could all click on something, make a mistake, and stuff like that. So having those accounts so that I'm only logging into my admin account when I need to install software, when I need to do system updates and system-wide changes, and my day-to-day usage account is a completely separate account, is a very, I think, key security practice. That's something that we are starting to implement by me, and I think that's a really good way to handle that.
The mindset was have two accounts. Mm-hmm. One is your day-to-day, which sometimes we'll be doing research online. We might get an email from administrator saying, "Hey, can you check this link?" One of the students was on there, and it's annoying. It's annoying. Yeah. I get it, but it's also making sure that security is there. So, two accounts. Your day-to-day account is non-admin. You're just a regular user, same way teacher, central office, whatever it is. And your other account is specifically your admin account, and you should only be using that when you request those elevated privileges. So when you're installing programs or troubleshooting or whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. And it's worked out really well so far. As well as we also just started doing two-factor. Okay. And as much as I'd like to push it out to everybody, we have to be very methodical about who can use two-factor. Is it effective? Are we just going to end up with half the staff just saying they just can't sign in? Yeah. And so what we're doing now is we did the technology department first. We'll test that out, kind of pilot it, and see how it goes. But
at least the admins, right? If you're gonna I think it's hard to roll two-factor out in a school environment. Teachers and even students, right? You don't have what's your other factor? You know what I mean? It's kind of difficult to answer that question. Mm. But at least your admins, those people that I know for me, I don't have someone trying to phish a student account on my network as much as not to say that it's not possible. It absolutely is possible, and they're just as equivalently a risk as anyone else. But my superintendent is always the target, or his account was always the one being phished or being mimicked, So at least having those people who are kind of like the face of the organization, and people, those big emails that are on the website,
very public
figures.
Accounts.
At least those people,
yeah,
getting those people on two-factor, I think, is going to be a very critical security step. That's, I think, the next thing that I'm going to start looking at.
Yeah, and just to keep moving on with the article, it also states remind users to not visit untrusted websites or follow links provided by unknown or untrusted sources. inform and educate users regarding the threats posed by hypertext links, and apply the principle of least privilege to all systems and services. And, we discussed this at our last podcast last week, where how Google will actually stop any downloads from not untrusted, but unencrypted sources. So
I wonder if that's why they did that. I wonder if they knew that this was kind of like a security risk in Chrome. No, like, sometimes it makes you wonder, like, they come out this security alert, but like at the same time, these companies are like, oh, and we're closing this security hole. It's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah. It's I totally agree. So, now just moving on to our next topic, which is going to be about disaster recovery, some things that go on in school, and what type of backup should I have in a school?
Pause.
Yeah.
I have my article.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
My article.
I'm getting ahead of myself here. I apologize.
He's so excited about disaster recovery. He's not even letting me get to my article for the week.
I love disaster recovery and backup because it's how we save
save the world
with backups.
All right. Well, it's actually kind of funny because, I think for those that are listening and watching, our workflow is very unique. Mm-hmm. We kind of just like bounce ideas off of each other all week long and things like that. So my article that I picked is actually on disaster recovery, but it was an article that I picked long before we even decided that this episode was going to be about disaster recovery. So good coincidence. Yeah. And an even better segue into actual episode when you let me do it.
There we go.
So this is on EdTech Magazine. 5 questions to ask when selecting a disaster recovery as a service provider. So, and really quickly before I get into the article, I think that's something that is, and the article talks about this a little bit, but, when you're talking about school districts and their technology departments, there's very limited budgets and there's very limited staff and resources, right? So how can you still get those disaster recovery needs answered by still maintaining your budget and your normal operations and things like that? And there's a lot of disaster recovery service providers that are out there. And this article really speaks to how you should go about selecting one and some of the good questions that you should ask, though, when you're looking for a good disaster recovery as a service provider. So it's just real quickly, what is the total cost? Again, schools, big budget consciousness, right? We can't afford a $20 million solution. It's as much as we'd like to have an ideal disaster recovery solution in place, on-prem, off-prem, all the different forms of backup, we just don't have that option. So, cost of ownership in the service is definitely the first question you have to ask yourself, I think. And then number 2 is, where is that data being stored? So that's important because we deal with a lot of critical data, and a lot of, you're talking about data that is not just critical, but it's data on minors, right? So along with first names, last names, and normal general personal identifiable data, we're collecting grades, we're collecting academic achievement information, we're collecting score data on standardized tests that are used to judge and rank these students at different college levels and academia. And we're also collecting medical records, right? Nurses' logs, immunization records, even an IEP document is technically a health record, right? So where is that data being stored is a very critical question I think you have to consider. The third was they went into how is the information being secured, right? So it's one thing to where is it being stored, but now how are they protecting that information? Is it encrypted? Is it accessible by the internet? All that is what, stuff they're going to have to consider.
Are they putting it in a separate silo, or do they have like one large backup where all their clients going?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a very good question.
Which leads into number 4, who has access, right? Is my data sitting on a shared drive with 500 other clients? You know, who in the in the services organization is accessing my data? What are their security practices? You know, how are they preventing people from within their organization and even from outside their organization from getting to my data? What are the controls that they have in place? And then excuse me, how often are they testing their recovery of my data? Right, so it's one thing to put your data somewhere. It's one thing to say it's secure there. It's one thing to say that no one can access it. But what happens if they go down? Okay, what happens if you go down and they go down? What happens if you go down? How long is it going to take for you to get your data back from them? Those are kind of some of the critical questions that you need to consider, because it's exactly that. Those are when the situation does occur. It is it's a critical situation, right? It's a disaster.
Yeah.
So being able to move and respond quickly and get back up quickly is essential. And so answering some of these questions, I think, is going to be key to selecting a disaster recovery as a service provider, if that is something that you're looking to do. And I think it's something that most schools are going to need to do in some way, shape, or form to really be truly protected. Just because, like I said, we don't have the budgets to have multiple data centers that are replicating and copying each other, and on-site backups, off-site backups, multiple medias, and all that. It doesn't exist. So, it's a good read on just some basic knowledge for those who may be in the situation of having to find a disaster recovery as a service provider.
And I think one more question that I would ask, and I'm not sure if it's in this, but which data are you backing up?
Yeah.
Because are you only backing up your entire VM with all the data on there? Are you only backing up specific drives? Are you only backing up specific volumes or LUNs or whatever the case may be? What are you backing up as well? Because I very much would, depending on how much it's going to cost, how difficult it is, if there are any egress fees. So very good questions to ask, but not the only questions. But this is a great place to start some ideas if you don't have backup or disaster recovery, regardless whether you're going with a service as a disaster recovery as a service. Still good questions to consider.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so now let's get into it. Let's get into the episode.
So, backup and disaster recovery.
Backup and disaster recovery.
Oh. This is what lets me go to sleep at night, knowing that I have a backup and everything is hopefully safe. But this is like your fail-safe. This is your backup of your data. And I want to start this conversation with, why should we even be backing up our data? And I think there are two main big reasons, but plenty more after that.
Well, let me ask you this. Can you operate without accessing your data?
No.
And it's a stupid question, right? But can you operate without accessing your data?
If I lost all my data today, I would be crippled.
Okay. And then people say, well, what do you mean if I lost my data? And I think that's the thing that I think people have to wrap their head around. Is it's not if I'm going to lose my data, right? We're not talking about if this is going to happen. I think the security threats that are out there there's so many, and it really is a question of when. As scary as it is, I don't think the question is if it's going to happen. It's when it's going to happen, and what are you going to do, and how quickly can you get back from that? So there's your answer. Why do we need to back up our data? Because you're going to lose your data.
Because you're going to eventually, at some point, get hacked or have some type of ransomware or malware that's going to encrypt your files and or destroy your files. And when you start that restore process, when you need to bring your systems back online, you won't have any clean copies of it.
Now, full disclosure, when I say it's going to happen, I don't mean guaranteed, right? Like, but if you put yourself in that mindset, I think you're going to be much more prepared if and when it does happen.
So I don't wish it upon anyone.
No.
I've seen colleagues and friends have to go through their entire systems, re-image, redo everything, and it's awful. But really, make sure you go in with the mindset. a lot of companies now go in with zero trust. You have to go into the mindset that at some point, my systems are going to get some type of virus or malware. Maybe not your server directly, but there is going to be a person or an individual who's going to download a link or download a file. Click on a link or download a file, and their files and any shares that they're connected to or any privileges that they have, that ransomware, malware, virus, Trojan, whatever it may be, will start to trickle across all of your systems. And it's specifically your file server, because that is what generally is left unprotected in a school. And all of those files will get encrypted or destroyed or just completely will become useless.
Yeah.
And so that's one reason why you should have disaster recovery or backups. The other reason is we're in schools, and a lot of our facilities generally aren't the industry standard of data centers, right? Very often do schools have enough money to tear apart a room, put an elevated floor in place, get some crazy fire suppression going, crazy security in place, whatever it is, or make sure there aren't any water pipes. And sometimes we are in those environments where a server is in a
excuse me.
Our servers might be in just kind of like a IT room or IT closet, but there are still pipes running across the top or heaters running along the side. Or God forbid, maybe you have your servers near a window, and there are physical things that can happen to that. That pipe can burst, that fire sprinkler may burst, the heat may burst, the window might break in, start leaking.
Multiple incidents that you have to kind of keep in mind, right? Because you're talking physical incidents, right? Like you said, we don't have the world's best data center, so anything could happen. Like in my server room, used to have a sink in it before it was converted to a server room. No, seriously. So they took out the sink.
Wash the server before you put it in the rack.
Exactly. Yeah. Do your weekly cleaning. But yeah, my server room used to have a sink in it, right? So. Wow. This is many years before they converted it to a server room, and they chose that that's where it's going to go. But now, yeah, it has air conditioning, and it's a nice room. But I have pipes against the wall that were there once from a sink that used to be there. Those pipes could burst one day. It's not the ideal situation, but it was the best that we could do when they were picking rooms. And that's where it worked. Unfortunately, that's something that we had to work around. But we did. But now it's a risk we have to keep in mind. So physical risks, and then you have internal and external threats, right? So I think everyone, when we talk like cybersecurity and people hear that, they think instantly their mind goes to some guy behind a laptop in China somewhere, or India, or wherever. These hackers are and they're sitting at their laptop at home in a dark room or in an internet cafe, and they're brute forcing their way into your network and doing malicious things. But a lot of those attacks that we're seeing now are actually being launched from internal sources, right? Like you said, someone opens up an email, someone brings a flash drive, someone brings a CD. So it's crazy to think someone brings their laptop and plugs in on your wired network. If you have all the perfect security practices in place, yeah, you can prevent these. But just like humans do, we miss things. We miss things. It's impossible to close every single hole, right? It's impossible. We can do our best efforts, and we should do our best efforts to mitigate the risk, but there's always a risk. And you have to, those internal, like you said, zero trust. Why do they call it zero trust? Because you trust nobody. Nobody. Not on the outside, not on the inside.
Right.
So yeah, those threats can come from anywhere.
So now with backups, there is a rule in the industry that's been a little bit more widespread. This is an article from Veeam that explains, it's called the 3-2-1 rule. And this is right on their backup, and there are many YouTube videos. There's a bunch of articles that you can go on there. I like Veeam because Veeam is a It is a large competitor in the backup and disaster recovery market. So there's just an article that I found from Veeam, and it explains the 3-2-1 rule, and it's saying that you should have 3 copies of your data. So you have your local copy, then you have 2 different backups, and they should be on 2 different mediums. That means, or 2 different media types. So that means if you're storing them on hard drives for your initial backup, and then your second backup is maybe like a disk, or something along the lines of maybe SSDs. I don't know. There's a couple different storage types that you can save on, and one of them should be stored off-site. So that means completely away from your location, and that's in the case of a natural disaster. So if there's a hurricane, earthquake, whatever it is, if let's say your off-site backup copy is another building in your district that's right down the road, and your town gets completely flooded. Now both of your buildings are underwater, and both of your backups have been completely destroyed. So when they mean offsite, it doesn't necessarily always have to mean in the cloud. Cloud can be another media type that you save on, but one should be completely away from your organization completely. So that's the 3 main 3-2-1 rule.
So tell me that again. Three different backups.
3 copies of your data.
Okay.
Saved on 2 different medias.
Okay.
And 1 offsite.
And 1 offsite. Okay. All right. Yeah.
So
it makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah. It basically means that no matter what happens, even if your backups are broken, then you still have a way of restoring them. It may not be the best and fastest way if you, let's say, use tape backups, but at least you know you have tape backups as in maybe like an archive, which is not relatively expensive, but it is time taking. It's a pain to pull data back, but just in case, you can always go back to them. And so I don't know if we're using 3-2-1. We're close. I think we're at like 2-2-1. But eventually I'd like to get to 3-2-1. And I was curious. I'd like to think about this, and I think we discussed this a little bit, is if money was no object, how would you set up your backup solution?
Wow. So money is no object.
Money is no object.
So let's go through the rule, right?
Sure.
The rule is three different copies across 2 medias, right? 1 off-site.
Right.
So 3 different copies. I think I would have in my ideal world, I think I'd have maybe 2 SANs.
Okay.
Okay.
In the same building?
No, separate buildings.
Separate buildings. Okay.
So and staggered backup. So what I mean by that is, maybe this is backed up at midnight and on one SAN, and we're backing up to this SAN at
noon or
noon.
Yeah, whatever.
Or whatever, 4:00 in the afternoon, so that we have some staggered backups. And then I think I'd have obviously want some sort of offsite, whether it's in the cloud, somewhere off-prem, out of the organization, kind of a backup. I don't know. I mean, again, money's no object, right? So,
2 SANs.
Yeah, I think 2 SANs, or maybe a SAN. Listen, we're talking really money's no object.
Really, money is no object.
Money's no object.
I want to hear it. What do you got?
Money's no object. I'm saying you give me 2 SANs, right? I'm having 1 in my main building. I'm having 1 in the second building. I want a tape backup system in my main building that's going to do tape backups as well. And then all my data I'm going to push out to a cloud provider somewhere, whether it's Amazon or whatever it is, in a data center completely off-site that's secure. Whether I'm renting rack space in a rack space center or doing some like AWS kind of a service.
Where would
money's no object?
Money is no object. So let me ask you a question. Would you store those tapes in your building, or would you take them somewhere?
I think I'd take them somewhere.
All right. Yeah.
Money's no object. I'd hire someone if that's their only job. Take the tapes and move them somewhere.
Yeah. I think, I would actually, what I would what I would do,
Okay.
if money is no object, I would have 3 sands.
Okay.
So in 3 different locations.
Okay.
The 2 sands would kind of be the backups, the same way that you said. I would just have a huge, extremely large sand as what would be called like an archiver. And I think it's important that we do not confuse backups and archiving. And so that third extremely large sand, whether it's like an Isilon or whatever is out there, whatever I want to use,
it's an archiver for your backups.
It's an archiver for your backups. So and on top of that, you have your original copy of your data. So that's 4 copies of your data. Right. So I'm doing like the 4-2-1 rule. Highly suggest doing backups. You know, obviously all your backup will be on disk, and then something that has been coming back into popularity is the tape drives.
Yeah.
And they have like 12 terabyte tape drives, 16 terabyte tape drives, and you kind of just need a reader, which is about 20 grand. And I think that includes a software or whatever it may be. And the tapes are relatively inexpensive, $300. So for not too much money, you can have your second form of media. And then obviously I would do offsite. And if money was no object, then I would do multiple. I believe Amazon also has their regular backup, which I forget what they called, but they also have the Glacier, which is another archiver, but it's very slow to pull from that. So
excuse me. We both mentioned Amazon.
Yes.
But let's come back to reality for a second here.
Yes.
Right? Reality. Why is Amazon something that is a challenge for schools to use? What makes it a challenge today? Like, why are we all not just getting on Amazon AWS? Like, it's so available, right? You can go buy your own space and, you know, you're up, right? What's the issue?
So Amazon is very, very competitive pricing to back up your data. But the problem lies when you want to pull that data back. There are now what are called egress fees.
Okay.
And depending on how much data you want to pull back, how quickly you want to pull it back, the time of day, whatever it is, their egress fees, I'm sure their model might change. That is not a fixed cost. And for a school, that makes things difficult because let's say you're in the middle of recovering from a disaster. The last thing you want to start worrying about is, can I get a purchase order cut for this? Is this going to be under my $40,000, bid limit?
Yeah.
Do I need some type of approval for this? And so I have, me personally, a problem with backing up to Amazon, even though they are very widely used. I just don't think for a school, Amazon is a good choice, just because when that disaster does happen, not if it happens, but when it does happen, the last thing I want to be worried about is how big of a bill am I racking up by having to pull all of my data back.
Right. Yeah, I mean, no, it's a valid point, right? Because, yeah, okay, so the disaster happened, and you're gonna do whatever you got to do to get that data back. Bottom line, you're gonna do whatever you got to do to get that data back. But there is a true limitation out there, and that's funding. You can't spend money you don't have. Bottom line, you can't spend money that you don't have. So you can have your data in an awesome backup solution, but if it's going to cost you, and I'm speaking hypothetical here, but let's just say it's going to cost you $500,000 to pull your data back in, and you don't have $500,000. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? So yeah, no, it's a valid concern, and like you said, that we're talking about spending a significant amount of money like that, and I'm not saying that that's what it would cost, right? There's a lot of factors that go into the cost. It could cost $500, but when you're talking about pulling your data back and you're going to spend a significant amount of funding, yeah, the bureaucracy of government spending still exists. You still have to go through all the right protocols and processes. Are they on a contract? Are they not on a contract? If they're not on a contract, are you multiple bids, and are you under bid threshold, and all that stuff? It kind of sounds crazy because there's only one person that's going to have your data. So why are you going to go out to bid? But it's the system, right? So you have to kind of work with that. Whereas corporations, they don't have that challenge, right? Like, oh, if I want to go with this vendor, I'm going to go with this vendor. There's no one really questioning me. I mean, they still have the challenge of the funding, right? If you don't have, again, you can't spend the money that you don't have, and that's another important thing to think about too. Because I've actually seen service providers that have provided services to organizations, and they've been hacked, or they've come across ransomware, and they've literally just said, you know what?
You'll pay it.
No. It's cost them too much. They literally said, you know what? We're closing shop.
Wow.
We're closing shop. We can't afford to get our data back and get back into business.
So just close.
So we're closing shop. And I've read many articles where you startup companies that have started and they've been hacked, and they literally just can't recover from it because of the financial burdens. So it's definitely something we have to consider, that those financial costs.
So speaking about financial costs, bringing it back to reality here, right? We talked about a backup system that if money was no object, this is how we would have it set up. And it would probably cost a couple $100,000 if I know how we would be configuring things. Now, we're at a school, right? I'm sure you have your backup set up differently. I have my backup set up differently. If, let's just say you had a decent budget, but fairly small budget to set up a backup solution, what is something that you would do?
Well, I think I would have, I still would try to go for two SANs. And I think this is going to sound kind of ridiculous, but I would try to minimize the amount of data that I'm actually holding on site to begin with. Not to say that we're not responsible for our data if it's off site, right? Because we're still responsible for it. But if I can pay an organization to do my accounting software in the cloud, okay, that organization, and if that organization specializes in doing accounting software in the cloud, and I can, talk to them and say, okay, well, how are you guys holding your data, and what are you guys doing for disaster recovery? Well, now I'm offloading that. I'm not just offloading that data, but I'm offloading the need of that, servers and infrastructure and everything, all to a company that can just handle that for me, and I don't have to worry about that.
And a little bit of the responsibility.
Yeah, as well. Exactly. Because again, my resources are not limited to my funding. They're limited to my staff. They're limited to my space, my ability to maintain the infrastructure. So if I can offload all of that, and know on top of that where I'm offloading it to, they have a good disaster recovery plan for my data, That's huge. So my critical data, my accounting data, my student information system, stuff like that I can try to push out, I'm going to do that.
Got it.
I don't want to say non-critical data, but we're schools, we're education, we have access to Google Drive unlimited storage. So my teachers, my students, save your files to Google Drive. I don't want to be responsible for your files. As crazy as that sounds, I can't be. I'm not saying Google is your be all end all and that you can't lose data in Google, but what I'm saying is that they have an infrastructure that's going to be a lot stronger than anything that I can afford to put in.
That's for sure.
So put your working documents, your I call it non-critical data, put it in your Google Drive. Don't keep it on your computer. Don't keep it on our network. And it's, you can access it from anywhere, so you can work on that stuff.
Quick interruption. Quick little entertaining thing. Go to YouTube and Google any of... I'm sorry, I messed up there. Go to YouTube and search any of Google's data centers. They have a couple tours out there. If you see their data centers... Incredible.
Oh yeah, no,
incredible.
I've seen those videos, and that's why I'm saying we can never. I don't want to say never, but I know me. I know where my district is financially. I can never do what Google does in their data centers. I can't. I just
incredible.
Can't. It's impossible. It's a dream for me. But that's why I'm saying push your data, push that non-critical data that people have, that their working data. Let them use the Google Drive. It's minimal cost to you anyway, right? And then my third thing is I'm still going to have a couple SANs in different buildings. I'm still going to do backups of my VMs. I'm still going to do backups of my critical files that I am holding on site, whether it's, my administrative shares, whether it's my employee records, things like that I'm still holding on site. I'm still going to do those backups. And if I can, I'm going to try to push some of that backup data out into a cloud provider as well.
That's a very good. I totally agree with you. We currently still have a couple systems in house. First thing, when I came in, I said, okay, how do we move this to push this to the cloud, and how do we push this to the cloud, and is it cost effective? Right? Is it going to? Is it cost effective? Is it going to cost? I'm just throwing random numbers out there. 5,000. Is it the application normally $2,500? Right, and that is to host it locally, and to host it in the cloud, it's $5,000 a year annually. So for that $2,500, is it worth it for me to be managing that backup, making sure it's secure, making sure I have multiple copies, making sure my physical environment is also a decent physical environment, or is that something?
Sorry, man.
That's okay.
I'm getting over a cold, guys. So sorry to the listeners at home that keep hearing me cough.
So is that something that for that $2,500 that I save, is that worth it? Or is it worth it to spend the $2,500, not have to worry about that physical environment, not have to worry after 5, 6, 7 years, I have to buy a new box and migrate that server and have downtime? Is $2,500 a year worth not having it internally? In my opinion, depending, you really have to look at your costs.
And like I said, look at those costs. But even the article that I brought up before, right? Those 5 questions, disaster recovery as a service that we from my article, those are not, that's not just limited to disaster recovery. Ask those same questions to your regular software as a service providers, to your cloud service providers. What are you doing with my data? Where's it being stored? How are you backing it up? How are you recovering my data if there's a situation?
You hold them responsible for it now.
Yeah. Again, I'm not saying that you're not responsible for your data just because it's sitting in the cloud. You are, right? You're still responsible for your data to some extent. But knowing that you have a bigger team behind you that also has the interest in protecting your data just as much as you do, and it's not something that you're holding on site and you're the physical target, is a big step.
That's right. I totally agree. So, this is kind of a topic that I have gone into a little bit. Some schools are Google, some schools are Office 365. They're using OneDrive, whatever it may be. Do we need to back that up? Is that something that schools should be maybe making like an archive for, or should we be backing up that data? Because now, as we move all of the files, hopefully eventually, I won't need a file server anymore. But do I need to have a backup of all that stuff that's in Google?
I don't know what the answer is to that. I'm going to be honest. I don't know what the answer is to that. I've heard that question asked a couple times. I'd be curious what people who are listening to this, think. If you have an opinion, go on our YouTube channel, give us a couple comments on that, because I'm curious. I really am. I've asked this question. Why am I backing up that data? Google has data centers all over the world. They're replicating and backing up my data.
It's never going, yeah.
So, I mean, I guess the question is the fear that one day Google is going to hold me hostage, but what's the reality of that happening? And then the other question is, okay, well, what happens if Google gets hacked? Well, I think we have a bigger problem as a people, right?
Your personal stuff, right?
Just in general, the whole world has a problem.
To make Google services more useful and personalized for you.
What the heck is that?
Privacy is important, and Google work.
Speaking of data privacy, there you go. Google's always listening. That was my Android. Sorry. So, yeah. So, I don't know. I don't see the value in it. I don't see the time. Again, I go back to resources. We're limited in resources. We're limited in funding. Is it worth me spending money to back up 40 data centers? Because that's what it is.
Yeah.
Your data's replicated and pushed across 40 different and I'm throwing out 40, but a significant amount of data centers, right?
Yeah.
And they're backing up your data. They're protecting your data. They're doing what they need to, their due diligence to protect your data and keep your data, safe. So
because that's kind of that's what they're in the business for.
Yeah.
They're in the business for making sure you can access your files, you can edit your files, you can do everything with your files. So they're going to have active scans on them, so constantly scanning for malware.
Sure.
I don't know this for a fact, but I am pretty certain Google is most likely doing some type of quality assurance or testing on their data and making sure that it's,
quality. I'm sure that they have probably a team of people that are just trying to hack them.
Oh, yeah, red team,
You know what
blue
I mean?
team, sure.
I'm sure that they do. So
I'm sure.
like I said, I don't have a definitive answer to that. I don't know. It's a question that's come up in different conversations I had with different people. It's in different group meetings and networking events. And do I need to be backing up my Google data? I don't know. I'm leaning towards no. Just thinking about it from a logistical and logical perspective. But maybe there's something I'm not thinking about. So if you are listening to this, send us some of your thoughts on this, because I am curious. Is it something that we should be doing, because we do have a lot of data in Google now.
Yeah, I'd like the idea. I just don't really see the viability.
Yeah.
It's nice to have a backup or an archive of your data. Is it really viable?
There's I forget the term, but there's a term used in security, and particularly God, that's gonna bother me. I can't remember the term, but basically security that is a facade, but that facade just gives you the comfort of security.
False sense of security.
Yeah, like that false. It's like I've heard like some examples are like the TSA at the airport, right?
I have heard that.
So like the TSA at the airport, they say, oh, you could get stuff back, but it makes people feel secure, and there's value in making people feel secure, right? And I don't know if this. I have no information on the studies on TSA security and not, but I'm just saying, like, so maybe this is another example of that. Like, backing up your Google data, yeah, you don't really need to, but it makes you feel good. So that's why people talk about doing it. I don't know.
So what did we learn today?
We learned that there's more than one way to make sure that you can recover from disasters. And there's a lot of stuff out there, services, different practices, different things you can be doing internally, different models. I think every scenario, every situation, you have to kind of look at what you're doing, look at your practices, and kind of adapt something that makes sense for you.
Yeah. I agree. But whatever you do, make sure you got a backup.
Yeah, without a doubt. Make sure you got a backup.
So thanks for tuning in, and remember, you can find this weekly podcast on all platforms as well as YouTube. New episodes are released on Tuesday, and if you'd like some more information about future episodes, please visit our website at www.techandedmedia.com. And lastly, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Tech and Ed Media. And thank you for supporting this podcast.
Thanks, everybody.